Okay, I think we're live. And I just want to talk a little bit about Stacey Abrams and the recent crop of Democratic breakout stars, quote unquote. These, you may have heard about them. Most prominent is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the the dim-witted ex former bartender, newly enshrined as the voice of the Democratic Party. She's kind of being groomed as I guess, the 21st century equivalent of JFK, uh, despite also being the leading figure of mockery and derisory. It's just the top punching bag for conservatives and right wingers, but she's basically one of several really highly touted stars in the Democratic Party. Ironically, most of them have been defeated, uh, such as Stacey Abrams and Beto O'Rourke. Even if they even if they were more successful than their immediate predecessors, but they were most of them were touted because they were very liberal, and in most cases, with the exception of Beto O'Rourke, non-white. he was Beto was an honorary Hispanic because he was able to pretend to be a Tejano by choosing a nickname, which proved to be more popular in Texas. But I just want to talk a little bit about the electoral aftermath, because Stacey Abrams gave her concession speech, which wasn't quite a concession speech yesterday, where she refused. Um, and it was really interesting. It was like around 7 or 8 minutes. I watched it. You can Most of you can watch it if you can probably find it. CBS News broadcasted, and it's probably still on their website. But it was interesting for a number of reasons, and one of them was that she she noted that it was in contrast to most concession speeches, and the fact that she didn't really concede. She's still filing a lawsuit to muddy the waters and dispute the fact that she was defeated, or although narrowly, pretty decisively. And you would think this would be a case where the Democrats would be touting her really narrow loss, in the sense that they ran their one of their last gubernatorial candidates was Jason Carter, the grandson of Jimmy Carter, who you would think he if anyone could revive the Democratic Party in Georgia, it would be the heir to the Carter dynasty, a Carter, but he actually lost by twice as much as Stacey Abrams. It wasn't even remotely competitive. Stacey lost by not twice, three times as much. Stacey Abrams lost by around two, or a little less than 2 percentage points. He lost by six, I believe, somewhere between 6 and 8 points. Despite the fact that Stacey Abrams was a hard left, very radical economic and social leftist, and made no bones about it. She ran a very wing kind of Bernie bro type of campaign. The only distinction was, unlike Bernie Sanders, unlike his early presidential campaign, she made no pretense about appealing to anyone who was not already in the left wing, the current Democratic coalition. In other words, in a very racially polarized, politically polarized, increasingly purple state, she did not even say, she did not even pretend to appeal to white voters or conservative voters. In fact, uh, so she didn't run as an economic populist, or she didn't run as she didn't run a campaign along the lines of the populist party, which was very popular very briefly in the South the early um, during the last century and the century before that. She she made clear that white people were her political adversaries, and that aside from very rich white liberals, the type of people that ironically supported Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, and 538 did a great analysis of this. If you want to look at their website, for all their faults, they are pretty good at things like this. They did a great analysis which proved that the reason Cortez won was because of the influx of Bernie bros and white hipster liberals to her congressional district. Not, it wasn't because there was an increased share of Hispanic and minority voters, and a larger portion of the Bronx was added to that congressional district. No, it was the complete opposite. But Stacey Abrams, that she didn't make any sort of appeal to white voters. She went out of her way to alienate them. In fact, she made a speech basically targeting farmers, despite the fact that agriculture is still a huge portion of Georgia's economy. I forget if it's 8% or 10%, but like California, it's still a vital component of their economy. But she went out of her way to alienate Georgians who were not minorities, or who were not very already hardcore leftists. So she didn't even make a Bernie Sanders like appeal to these people. She ran a very divisive campaign, yet she came much closer to becoming governor than Jimmy Carter's grandson, or that any of the more moderate candidates. She crushed her white, also very liberal, but more conventionally appealing opponent, who was also named Stacey, her Democratic opponent in the primary. She crushed her, and she almost became governor. And yet, she was still, instead of being content and using this as some sort of building block for a future gubernatorial run, she just made an embittered, rancorous, concession speech, which I think illustrates that the new Democrats in the new left, they don't want to compromise, and they're not going to be compromising. They're not going to be munificent overseers of this new multicultural left wing paradise that liberal and that leftist progressive thinkers have been touting. And you can see it throughout the country. Now that Democrats have retaken the House and that they've made inroads, the two Muslim candidates who were just elected, these are not. Uh, they're not even. They're not even uh, moderate, quote unquote, Muslims. I kind of agree with the Turkish dictator Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who said there is no such thing as moderate Islam. I actually believe he's right, but they're not even um, pretending to be moderate. The Ilhan Omar is a Somali woman who it's hard to even describe her as a Minnesotan, even though she lives there. She is was a Somali refugee, quote unquote. She was a fake refugee who came here under false pretenses and married her brother to commit immigration fraud. It's not an exaggeration. You can look up the details. She basically married one of her immediate family members in order to commit immigration fraud and stay in the U.S. She shouldn't even be here. Uh, I think the Justice Department of Trump, if they were smart, they they would have initiated an investigation to start to revoke her citizenship and get her deported. But that's it's probably too late to do that. But yeah, she's a fake refugee who somehow managed to inveigle her way into Congress after hooking up with Keith Ellison and the Democratic Party in Minnesota. And and of course, the minute she's elected, renounces any she renounces any previous pledge not to be a radical, quote unquote, Muslim, and comes out in support of the BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign, and says, "Yes, I'm fully anti-Israel. I'm a jihadist, basically." And she says that the minute she is elected, which is not surprising to anyone. The same thing with the Muslim woman who was elected in Michigan, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. And this is what you're going to expect from the future of the Democratic Party. You have, I mean, you have some candidates like Kristen Sinema, who was able to wheedle her way into office under dubious circumstances, who are going to pretend to be moderate just because of the dynamics of the states like Arizona. You can't run as a radical Muslim or a radical socialist who despises white people in Arizona. You just can't. So she had to jettison all of her past affiliations. But mostly, I think the driving force, the enthusiasm for the Democratic Party is going to be these radical, racially polarizing figures, and it's going to be driven to a certain degree by demographic changes, but I think also um, a large portion of this is driven by the remnant of white people in the Democratic Party who are millennials, or probably younger than millennials, generation Y, who are just hardcore radical, kind of Prada, what Alexandria AOC describes as Prada socialists. These people are going to be making the decisions of the Democratic Party, especially as the Clinton machine, their hold on power, whatever power they have, attenuates. And I think that's what you're going to be seeing a lot of in the future. And I think it's going to occasion a commensurate radicalization in the Republican Party. I hope, I hope it forces the GOP to at least start to begin to do what it did during the last presidential campaign and make a clear break with neoconservatism and open borders, Coke influenced, just kind of disdain for sovereignty and reasonable immigration policy. I'm not. I don't think the Cokes are demons, but I think the the mass immigration type of kind of chamber of commerce dominated policy making from the GOP, which is reflected in the new minority leader, Kevin McCarthy. I think it needs to be abandoned, and the results of this recent election demonstrate that needs to go. Anyway, just my thoughts on the recent electoral aftermath, and tell me what you think.